Well, for all the Steelers' struggles through 4 weeks, they could actually leave Acrisure Stadium on Sunday afternoon with a share of the AFC North lead if they can beat the 3-1 Baltimore Ravens in a game most of the nation will see on CBS. I'm your host, Matt Gajtka, Derrick Bell, analyst at SteelersNow.com and from his own YouTube channel as well. Joins me again. We're going to take the lessons learned from last week, and yes, there were a few from the 30-6 loss at the Texans. Then we're going to contextualize them for the next game. It is Ravens week, right? So we're looking forward to that. And for the first time in nearly 2 years, Lamar Jackson will be available for a Ravens-Steelers matchup, and so should Kenny Pickett, if recent reports are to be believed, and if the trend of him practicing in full down on the south side is also a good indicator. So, Derrick, first of all, let's talk a little bit about what we saw last week on the field down in Houston, because the juxtaposition was not very good for the Steelers, and not just talking about the loss, obviously, but also Kenny Pickett when he played before he was injured versus C.J. Stroud on the other side. Not saying Stroud set the world on fire, but that's three pretty darn good weeks in a row for the rookie, who's a couple of years younger than Kenny Pickett, but of course he came out as the more highly regarded prospect out of Ohio State, but he's been able to slide right in. Whatever the Texans are doing is playing to his strengths. You tweeted a couple of times about that this week, just in watching the tape, how big of a difference that is, seeing one quarterback look super comfortable and the other in Kenny Pickett in the Matt Canada offense so far this year, especially looking rather skittish. So what do you think are the main differences there between the setup with the offense and a young quarterback with one team that's struggling in the Steelers and the other that we saw last week with the Texans?
Yeah, I think it's almost shocking to watch them back to back days. We all saw the game live on Sunday, but then you really get into the film. I watched the Steelers offense on Monday, and then I watched the Steelers defense on Tuesday, and just watching those offenses play in back to back days and watching the quarterbacks play, it's there's such a distinct difference in how everything's moving right now. And like the best way that I can probably explain it is, with Stroud, everything in their offense just seems intentional, and everything is playing right into where it highlights his strengths. So like on Sunday, we saw Stroud's accuracy really just show up, and that was like his big thing coming out of Ohio State was the anticipation, the accuracy, the way that he can layer the football with either velocity or touch. That throw to Nico Collins even to end the game, which the game's over at that point anyway. But that's a really good example. He puts that ball literally in a perfect spot with Collins, who has separation, but he puts it in such a good spot that it's like a walk-in touchdown. And then on the other side, you look at Pickett, and it almost seems like the way that the Steelers offense is constructed and the way that he's playing is it's highlighting all of his weaknesses. So like his weaknesses coming out of college were, the pocket navigation stuff, some of the frenetic footwork that leads to like him not being able to get to, his second, third, fourth read. And that's just such a bad omen for a new quarterback in the NFL, because we always talk about coordinators and coaching and how it's supposed to really bring out the best in players. And it just seems like those two quarterbacks are headed in like such opposite directions right now, which is a really scary thing if you're like a Steelers fan.
What do you think about how the absence of Deontay Johnson has affected Kenny Pickett as well? Because he does have something going with Pickens, it seems like, over the course of their time together in Pittsburgh. And Calvin Austin has also shown some flashes here. But overall, it's kind of like a receiver core without Johnson that's trying to make its way in the NFL the same time that its quarterback is trying to make its way. So do you think there's some connection there to be made?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Deontay being out, it's taken away some of his comfortability in terms of just the quick game stuff. So that was like one of the things like down the stretch last year, when he was able to get the ball out quick. And that's something that we haven't seen him do this season. His time to throw is not extremely low in some of these games. And, it's just taken him a long time to find a rhythm in games. Well, a good way to get into rhythm is throwing to open receivers, right? And Deontay's always been a guy that's, gets open at pretty much will, especially when they're playing um, man coverage. So having that quick twitch guy that can, win underneath on curls, on the out routes, slants, things like that is definitely helpful. The biggest problem that I see though in terms of the difference in how teams are playing the Steelers is they're just not getting any man coverage, and it's interesting to see. But some of the things that they're doing over the past couple weeks, George Pickens is seeing some brackets, he's seeing some safeties rolled over to his way, and you can do those things when Deontay Johnson's not on the field, and they're just not seeing as much man coverage because like last year, they would get into some of those third down situations and teams would go single high. Well, Pickett would see that and he's like, okay, I'm just going to throw a back shoulder to George Pickens because Pickens was coming down with 70-75% of those contested catch opportunities. Teams are basically saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to sit with two high safeties. We're going to roll some coverage over to Pickens. We're going to cloud his side and then make you go elsewhere with the ball, make you go through your progressions and try to get home with some pressure. And just so far through, the first 4 games or so, they just haven't been able to do that on offense.
Yeah, it's a good lesson in that there's always that counterpunch coming from NFL defensive coordinators. And I guess how would you assess that burst that we saw at the end of last season where Pickett had some moments? Was it more just teams still hadn't gotten the full book on him? There's a full offseason to come. How much of that do you think factored in with how he was at least able to give us some glimmers of hope? And then, of course, we saw that in the preseason too.
Yeah, I think for me, man, it just shows the cruel like cycle of nature in the NFL. We often talk about just how good, how smart these offensive minds are in the NFL, right? You know, we look at what Mike McDaniel's doing in Miami. We look at what Kyle Shanahan's done over the course of his time in San Francisco. Those guys are so smart, but I think we oftentimes, because of that, we oftentimes forget about how good the defensive coordinators are in this league. And you got to think that teams just came off, a 9-month span where defensive coordinators are constantly going back and looking what's working in the NFL, what's not working. You got teams that, for example, like the Browns, that they're going through their scouting reports on the AFC North. The Ravens will be a good example this week. They're going to see what these quarterbacks struggle with. And, unfortunately, the more tape you put out there, the more your tendencies shine through. And I think some of that's been the Steelers' problem too, is they've defenses are starting to understand what not just what they like to do on offense, because we've talked about some of the tendencies from Matt Canada's offense, but they're also getting some tendencies on what he likes to do because
Mhm.
now we have that full season's worth of games to kind of go through and get those. So it's been a little bit eye opening. But I think that the good quarterbacks, the ones that make it in this league, they're able to kind of punch back. And I think that's kind of what we're waiting on from Kenny Pickett right now is to kind of get up off the mat a little bit and punch back.
Well, on the other side of the football, Derek, there were also plenty of problems at Houston. You highlighted in a video of yours on your YouTube channel this week 14 missed tackles by the Steelers, most of them in the secondary, most of them maybe not necessarily leading to huge plays, huge chunks down the field, but turning perhaps a no-gainer into a 10-yarder. That's just as damaging when it comes to getting off the field and having some success as a defensive unit. So does that maybe lend some credence to what Mike Tomlin was talking about this week, where he wanted to see more physical practices, more padded practices during the week, trying to make adjustments in that regard? I know a lot of folks sloughed that off. They wanted to hear about personnel changes in the coaching box, shall we say. But did he have a point in that regard, just based on what you've seen on the tape over the first 4 weeks, especially last week?
Yeah, I think, watching the defensive performance on Tuesday on film, I think you can definitely see why he said that. The Steelers, I personally, something that I talked about after the game was it just felt like the Steelers never really got off the bus. And, obviously coaching, does have to own part of that, right? So that's obviously going to fall somewhat on Tomlin. They just never really looked like they had any energy on either side of the ball on Sunday against the Texans. And the Texans, they looked completely opposite. They looked ready to play. They had a plan. So I thought the Steelers got outcoached, but they also got, outplayed. And that's the thing when you mentioned the secondary, man, like Keanu New, I think he missed 4 tackles. Pretty much all the corners had rough moments in space. And that's particularly frustrating because the cornerbacks right now in particular, they're not playing very well in coverage. So teams, number one passing options are having a field day against them. But, when you're struggling as tacklers, when you're struggling in run defense, those are the things that I think get more and more frustrating because I think we all kind of expected that the Steelers were going to take some lumps in the secondary when their pass rush wasn't dominant,
Mhm.
but you expect veteran corners and veteran players in the secondary to tackle. You expect them to play the run. And right now, they're not doing that either.
Does that make a defense too one-dimensional when it is so reliant on the pass rush? And we know the Steelers can be spectacular. We saw it against the Browns when they were wrecking havoc against Deshaun Watson and that offensive line. They essentially won that game. So you're going to have games like that, but over the course of 17 games in a regular season, maybe a couple playoff games if you're fortunate, can that be maybe not the most sustainable way to have consistent defensive success if you're just relying on your big guys up front to get through?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I do think it makes him a little bit one dimensional, but I also think with every NFL team, you're gonna have weaknesses on both sides of the ball. Even like the unstoppable teams in the NFL, they have like little weaknesses that you can exploit. Now, the Steelers secondary right now, the way that they're covering, I think is a little bit. I'm not sure how fixable some of these issues are, to be honest with you, with the current personnel that they're rolling out there.
Mhm.
But you're seeing some changes. They're not playing as much man coverage. They're having to play a lot of off coverage because Levi's not really comfortable in press, and then Patrick Peterson, he's lost a step. So you're seeing a lot of off coverage from the corners. I thought the Texans took advantage of that a couple times. But, we knew what it was coming into the season. The Steelers had invested a good amount in their front. You got highly paid players. Cam Hayward, of course, is hurt. But you got Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt making big money. You got Larry Ogunjobi making big money. You've invested in some of these younger guys, Keanu Benton, even bringing over Marcus Golden. So we knew that if this defense was going to be good, the pass rush is going to have to dominate pretty much week in, week out. And if teams are being smart about how they're blocking that up, in their protections and stuff, they're gonna be able to throw the ball on the Steelers. That's not gonna change really throughout the season. So they've got to figure out a way to kind of make the quarterbacks hold on to the ball for that extra tick.
Okay, so let's stay on that theme with the Steelers secondary as it matches up this week against Baltimore. I mentioned a 1 p.m. kickoff from Acrisure Stadium. The Ravens come to town with Lamar Jackson. We'll talk about him in the fourth down. But on third down, the Ravens have made some significant changes on the offensive side. They have a new offensive coordinator, but they also they brought in Odell Beckham Jr., they brought in Nelson Aguilar as well. So they add something to this offense, which in the past, at least when Jackson has been at his peak, has been incredibly run reliant. Now, of course, some injuries have precluded them from being as run dominant, and I suppose fortunately so, because they do have this new offense they're working in. But talk specifically about the receiving core that the Ravens have and how they might present a different challenge for the Steelers this time around.
Yeah, it's different because I think we're used to seeing. You mentioned like Nelson Aguilar. We're used to seeing these Steelers Ravens matchups where like the guys they're throwing outside are just I don't want to say nobodies because that sounds disrespectful, but they're guys that you don't necessarily have to have a lengthy scouting report on. They're just, guys, they're throwing warm bodies outside. And I think
Mm-hmm.
this year feels different because, they've brought in a couple of vets, Aguilar being one of them, Odell Beckham being another. And then they went out, and invested a first round pick in Zay Flowers out of Boston College. And, for Beckham and Aguilar at this point in their career, like they're just fine role players. Like Beckham's still that crafty route runner, still got the ball skills, the tracking ability. Aguilar's already made a couple really nice catches over the middle for Lamar, which is where he really likes to operate. But I think like going and getting Zay Flowers, man, like I think it's close to really opening up this Ravens offense to a point that we haven't really seen under Lamar. And that's really just because Zay's such a dynamic athlete. He can stretch the field vertically because he's so fast. And then he's also really good with the football. Like he's top three, I think, in forced missed tackles after catches this year already, according to Pro Football Focus. So having a guy who can make plays in a bunch of different ways. And I think from the Steelers' perspective, we talk about man coverage. The Steelers right now don't have anyone that can run with him. So that changes the way that that changes some of the ways that you can even try to cover these guys because of his speed and what it does to a defense.
There was plenty of talk in the offseason about a great offseason for Steelers general manager Omar Khan, and Peterson was one of those cited as a positive. Has he been the biggest disappointment for the Steelers, and does he maybe leave them in the lurch the most out of all the new guys they brought in?
Yeah, I think, if there was one thing in the offseason that I think I really, really just struggled with in terms of why they did what they did, I really just thought that the Cam Sutton decision was just so weird to me. I thought that, you have this guy in the building for, 6 years or however long Cam was here. He develops, is he a number one corner? Is he not? Who cares? He's a solid starter. You knew what you were getting. He fit the system, and to let him go over just like and then bring in Peterson and some of the decisions they made that after that just never really made sense to me. But I think with Peterson, man, I think the one thing that we kind of were curious about is coming over from that quarter system in Minnesota, we needed to see if like can this dude still play man coverage on the outside? And I think that you're seeing some of the examples as the Steelers aren't playing as much man, and he like you saw the Nico Collins touchdown at the end of the game against Houston. Nico's a really good player too. Don't get me wrong, but I just think that asking him to get up and press, I just don't think that those days are still here. That's not to say Peterson can't be useful. Still incredibly smart. Still got good ball skills. But I just think that, if you're wanting to play a cornerback on the outside like that you don't trust in single high, it just limits what you can do on the defensive end, unfortunately.
Yeah, and so the Steelers have to contend with that, and they're in the process of dealing with that. There was some talk this week at Steelers headquarters about perhaps Joey Porter Jr. deserving some more reps. How do you feel about that issue?
Yeah, I mean, with Porter, man, we kind of saw the vision. I mean, the Steelers in the past couple years increase man coverage rates. They go out, they get a corner who really wants to be in bump and run. He wants to play at the line of scrimmage, wants to play man coverage. He's almost the antithesis of some of these other guys. He's much more comfortable at the line of scrimmage than he is when playing off. But I think you've already seen flashes. I think that's what probably is frustrating mostly to Steelers fans is when Porter's been in the game, he's looked really good, especially when he's been targeted. So they're getting those little glimpses, and I think it's making them want more, right? And then every week it seems like Tara Austin and the Steelers are pushing back on the notion that we need to continue on with this plan instead of forcing him into more action. One thing that I would just like to do is, he right now he's playing in the dime. The Steelers are playing more dime than pretty much anyone in the league. So they're already playing him pretty much at max capacity and in the current personnel groupings. But I think you could probably make an argument to play him in the nickel. They're in a decent amount of nickel. You can play him on the outside and move Peterson to the slot. I mean, are you really getting so much from Chandon Sullivan? And I know they're going to try to start working in Desmond King, but are you really getting so much from those guys that you can warrant or you should feel comfortable putting your number 32 overall pick on the bench? Like who's looked better, who's going to make you a bigger impact? So that would be something that I would really kind of bang the table for is, getting him on the field in nickel and seeing if, you can make something shake that way.
Has that been a weakness for this coaching staff? Do you think that they perhaps have gone for the what's comfortable or what's reliable or what they've seen in the past, as opposed to having more of a development during the season mindset? Because, like you said, this is the NFL. It's a salary cap league. It's designed to have parity. No one's going to be perfect. You're going to have to work in some of your young players, maybe even if they're not quote unquote ready as you would like them to be. So, with the way the season's going, maybe this should be a developmental type season. Do you feel like that adjustment could be warranted just overall on the Steelers defensive side, offensive side, whatever, the entire coaching staff? Should they look more to trying to make some progress with these individuals during the season, as opposed to just be like, okay, we're gonna plug and play and be as absolutely win at any cost as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always try to kind of ride that really thin line of, all right, what's best for the team right now? And then is there a way that we can also do what's best for the team in a year from now or 2 years from now? So I think, that's always a tough discussion. But I feel like the Steelers over the past couple of years have done a good job of making those decisions and treading that line. I think that, and maybe it's not just the team itself, but maybe we all kind of overestimated a little bit, maybe the strength of the roster. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think that they had these plans coming in. Look at Dan Moore Jr., for example. Look at Patrick Peterson, or some of these other guys. We looked at how good the defensive front looked in preseason. All these position groups looked really good in the preseason. So I think maybe it gave the Steelers some false hope of, okay, we got some young guys. Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr. They need some technical refinement, but we can bring them along slowly because the guys we've got in there right now are trustworthy. They're going to be good enough for us to, win some games and bring them along as we go. Well, the regular season's hit, and unfortunately, a lot of those kind of notions have kind of been thrown out the window, right? You even look
Mhm.
at just the guys that they picked, the guys ahead of them aren't playing very well right now. Broderick Jones comes in. Dan Moore wasn't particularly great the first month. You look at Joey Porter Jr., the outside cornerbacks have not been good the first month. Even Keanu Benton, you get Cam Hayward's injury. I think that some of the other guys have um, stepped up and done some nice things, but he's out playing them right now. That's just, you can watch it on tape, and he looks like the best defensive lineman they've got over the past couple of weeks when he's got the opportunity to play. And even Darnell Washington, like I think that we all had higher expectations for Pat Fryermuth over the first month of the season. So when guys ahead of those rookies are struggling, yeah, I think it's realistic to expect some frustration from the fan base, and to expect some at least minor tweaks from the coaching staff.
Of course, that bye week is coming up, but not before they face off with Lamar Jackson for the first time in a couple of years. As I mentioned at the top, the Steelers have avoided him the last couple of matchups. But honestly, Dirk, they've done pretty well against Lamar Jackson over his career. They've forced some turnovers, interceptions, fumbles. And as you wrote this week, Jackson does put the ball on the ground quite a bit compared to your average NFL quarterback. So the guy's not infallible. Clearly, the Ravens weren't even sold on bringing him back on a long-term basis, but they did. And well, so far, so good in the 2023 season. As we touched upon, a different offense, different offensive coordinator. They've spread some things out. They're back in more of a traditional 11 grouping on the offensive side, personnel wise. So they're not quite as power run oriented. So, what are you seeing in terms of new wrinkles for Jackson and the offense that he leads?
Yeah, I think just the switch from Greg Roman to Todd Monken, you can feel it when you watch them on tape. You mentioned just the personnel groupings being completely different. They were only in 11 personnel, which is just three receivers, one tight end, one running back. They were only in 11 personnel, like 11 or 12% last year. I mean, it was a complete outlier that almost broke all the little graphs you see on Twitter. It literally broke those. And then now you look at their offense, and they're in that personnel grouping 50% of the time. So the offense feels more spread out. The passing game feels more modern. Some of the things that they're doing with Lamar in the passing game is, it's better. He's getting the ball out of his hands quicker. The receiving options, we already kind of talked about them. If you're going to be more spread out, you're going to play more receivers. You need more capable bodies out there, and I think that they've done a good job at least giving him viable threats. And then, something that we all kind of wondered too with Monken was he going to be able to kind of form this offense that kind of developed the passing game further than what Roman was ever able to take it there, but also keep some of the run game stuff that Roman did a really good job, helping Lamar acclimate to the league. And what's made Baltimore so dangerous over the course of, however long he's been in the league now, since 2018. So, you're still seeing the quarterback run game stuff. They're still mixing in, a lot of gap heavy schemes. You see a lot of zone read, power read stuff with him. So he's a really difficult player to defend. And I think that this Monken offense is still in the very early beginnings of, taking form. But so far, I think if you're a Ravens fan, you probably have to feel pretty good about how this thing's going so far.
Yeah, the season starts with J.K. Dobbins ripping his Achilles, and you think, well, at least I thought, well, maybe there goes the Ravens as a serious threat this year. But it just goes to show you the power of scheme, the power of a change, and obviously the talent of a guy like Lamar Jackson. But are there some spots there that the Steelers defense can attack. I mentioned that they have had success forcing Lamar to turn it over in the past, but is that something that you can count on continuing here into 2023?
Yeah, I mean the sample size is, really small. It's hard to believe that he's only started 3 games against the Steelers over the
Yeah,
course of his
true.
career because of how long he's been here. He's had some injuries. He was out for COVID. They rested him 1 game, I believe, and it's just been, weird kind of circumstances. But you mentioned the turnovers. They've turned him over 8 times in the 3 games. He's only got 4 touchdowns. I think 8 turnovers. So I mean that success is incredible, especially consider what he's done to the rest of the league. MVP. He's been a easy, surefire top 5, top 10 quarterback over the course of his career. So they've had success, and the thing about turnovers, man, is it's tough to replicate that on a week by week basis. I mean, we've seen that. That's something I put in the article. We've seen that this year already. San Fran, Houston only got 1 turnover. They got thrashed on defense. But then week 2, week 3 against the Browns, against the Raiders, they pick up 7 turnovers and they look great. So it's tough. But it's not impossible to do. But I think what you're going to see from the Steelers defense, you're going to see a lot of zone coverage, a lot of spot drop, keeping your eyes on the quarterback, just to make sure you get as much eyes on him as possible. I went back and found a really interesting stat from their matchup the last time they saw Jackson in 2021. They played zone coverage on 42 of his 45 of his dropbacks. So it's like 90% of the time he dropped back to pass, they were playing zone coverage, which is you just don't see that really in the NFL. You don't never see that. So it was really interesting. I'm anticipating a lot of that. A lot of that will probably carry over. But this is a new Ravens offense. That's what I think I'm so excited to see. Is I'm excited to see the chess match back and forth on how the Steelers are going to defend this new version of the Ravens offense with him back there healthy.
The Ravens haven't put up a ton of points this year, but they've been in the 20s consistently. 25 against the Texans week 1, 27 against the Bengals, 19 in the loss to the Colts that got away from them late, and then last week dominating the Browns 28-3 up in Cleveland. So are we looking at another game in which both the Steelers and the Ravens are in the teens? We've seen that so many times. Is 20 all it's going to take to win this game, or do we just have to throw that stuff out the window? Because, well, things are definitely different this year with Baltimore and the Steelers. Maybe not in the position as they once were defensively to totally shut down a team.
Yeah, it's really funny. You go to the over under for the game, and I think it's 38 right now, and you just never see NFL games that are like below 40. But that's how typically these Steelers Ravens games are, right? 16-13, 19-16, 20-17. Those are just what we're accustomed to seeing with these two units when they face off. But I think it's nearly impossible to see the Steelers blowing out the Ravens with the way that their offense is playing right now. Baltimore feels like they're close to a breakout on offense. They've had some bag breaking penalties. Lamar's put the ball on the ground in less than ideal situations. I think he's fumbled in their own territory and lost a fumble, I think, like every game this season. So that was one of the things that I said that the Steelers need to do is like whenever they get him in the pocket, they need to make sure that they're attacking his throwing hands. Sometimes his hand will separate. He'll be a little loose with the football back there. That's a way that you can probably take advantage of some of his tendencies. But it does feel like they're really close to having a big game. I hope that that's not this week, but we'll just have to see. I think it's going to be interesting to see unfold. The Steelers offense is going to have to show some life. What does make me feel a little bit better is Kenny Pickett's probably best game from last season was that last Baltimore game. So maybe this, even though I'm a huge fan of the Ravens defense and some of the things that they do schematically, maybe this is exactly what, he needs to kind of get off on the right track as well.
Yeah, it seems like a long time ago. That winning drive just after the new year in Baltimore was pretty spectacular stuff. And we have not seen that version of Kenny Pickett. Hopefully he's at least close enough to full health where he can pull something off like that this week. But we'll find out. As you said, Steelers, Ravens, somewhat predictable, right? And that both teams probably aren't going to be lighting it up. But at the same time, there's also that level of unpredictability that comes with these big rivalry matchups. And yes, Steelers, Ravens still is a big rivalry in the NFL. And of course, within the context of the AFC North, usually it's one of those two teams who end up on top at the end of the year. All right, you can check out Derrick's work at SteelersNow.com. He's a huge part of the SN Plus platform there, premium content for you, where he really breaks down the film and digs in. He's also got his own YouTube page, and as you see there on your screen, you can find him on social media at Steelers_DB. For Derrick, I'm Matt. This has been the Steelers Now Pregame Scout. Enjoy Steelers Ravens, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks on the backside of the bye.